Live
Live
streaming
streaming
is on.
is on.
Hello, world. My name is Jerry Fielka. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Clinton Ignatoff, who is helping us today. Thank you, Clinton. And our guest is Amanda Krugliak. Is that the correct way to pronounce your last name?
It is, yes.
Thank you, Amanda. It's really a pleasure. It's April 2nd, 2021. And the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being, I would say, is to love and be loved.
Oh my God. You know who wrote that song is the first hippie. He hung out here in Venice, California. His name's Eden Abez, and he got it from old Jewish cantor. But it's the song that made Nat King Cole huge. It's an amazing phrase. I use it as a mantra. It's to love and to be loved. What a beautiful way to start. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Oh my gosh. I think what I'm most responsive to is the visual world. So I feel that actually the way my brain works, that I would almost say that it's wired in such a way that although I love words and conversations, that I engage with the world visually most of all. So I suppose I'd like to receive information from the visual cues around me first.
Gotcha. That's beautiful. Now, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think they want to be connected. I think it's a way of reflecting not only on their experience, but also through that information, they're somehow connected to other people beyond themselves. So on one hand, I think it's because they seek an understanding of the human experience. But in another way, I think information connects us.
Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented by human beings? You know, it's probably both and it depends, but just what you're leaning towards.
It's hard to answer that because I know from myself, I have almost a preoccupation to collect, and that includes information. So I feel kind of like a ferret that I'm always wanting to take in, collect things, bring them in, right? But I don't know if everyone feels quite that way. I think that it's certainly innate, this desire to seek. But I think that we're taught different ways to do that, or there are different motivations for gathering and collecting. And I think that's something we acquire.
Very good. So do thoughts create emotions?
Wow, this is a hard day already.
Oh, well, just have
a minute. I don't think I
basically just have fun with it. What you've already touched on is what we're more after is your feelings, your intuitions, your hunches. There's no right or wrong answers. And it's just like, what do you feel, what comes to you?
Ask me one more time. Tell me again. Give me the order of the question.
Do thoughts create emotions?
I think thoughts create longing. So I think we feel things, but as we come to think about them and rethink them and reimagine them and play them back, and, really thoughts are about longing.
Yeah, well put. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Meaning.
Yeah.
So don't you think that's a contradiction? On one hand, I tell you, the greatest thing I could imagine in my life is to feel love and to love. And it's also the most insecure thing to me, right? It's the least, it's the thing I can't pin down. And despite that craving, longing, I am driven by meaning, even though it often leaves me uncomfortable and unmoored.
Yeah. No, there's a lot to that. In the root of that question is Viktor Frankl's book Man's Search for Meaning, where we could share an ice cream cone together and we'd both be happy. It tastes good, and we talking. But what would last? The ice cream cone ends, and the talk and our time together might last. So meaning tends to last. Happiness doesn't necessarily. But again, it's just two different words, and you can't separate them. But this is great because you understand like I said, there's no right or wrong answers. And when I give these two choices on some of my questions, doesn't mean those are the only two choices. I mean, this is even more basic. Do you think of course it's both and it depends, but in general, do you think human beings are more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I think that's another one of those questions about how we're conditioned.
Yeah.
I think that we're feeling beings who then are forced to adapt or survive or adjust or suck it up or repress or all of these other things that come into play, and not to minimize the intellectual side of all of us, but I think we probably first feel or initially were beings that were feeling beings, and that's how we found our way through the world. And then the complexity of things became a thinking world.
Yeah. Do you think the brain more detects consciousness or creates consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're just detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I think we create it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's not like a sensor. I think that it's more something that collectively we create. And it's always changing, whatever one state of consciousness is. I think it's forever evolving. I think often it moves in such a fast pace we can't even comprehend what that is. But so I would say it's something more that we create or even manifest, in a sense, right? Than something that we're detecting. That's a fixed point. At least it doesn't feel that way to me.
Yeah, I like that word manifest. Yeah. That's what I like in asking questions is I'm always open to how to word them better or differently. Because, I've had this script 30 years, I'm asking the same questions, and occasionally I'll change the wording because of somebody suggesting a different word. So what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Light, of course. How is that even a question?
That's good. Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded, "You can if you expose the tools. What new tool can you suggest?"
That's a question I've been thinking a lot about in terms of storytelling and how I'm somebody who loves stories, and I find other people stories is what turns me on, what I find exciting, and I'm really passionate about that. But I also think we're in a moment, sort of in the way that you're talking about it, where it's always been someone's story, but somebody else's house, right? Somebody else's frame of a story. And so we're in this moment where things have to be dismantled in order for us to to build something new. It has to happen because of inequity, because of people who are marginalized, because of corrupt systems. We've seen that for the past year, and we know there's no easy resolve. And the only way to move forward is really to undo it. So what you're saying, initially it requires, do you take the house down? Do you just, do you rebuild with the materials that are already there. Um, it's important to expose, I think, what isn't working in this house. It's important to only to dismantle it in order to create a new order of things. So that's how I feel about it. That absolutely we have to be willing to take the house down in order to make something new. But I don't think we shuck all of uh, the 2x4s and all the molding and all the history. I think it's more a matter of reassembling something. Um, so I don't know. Did I go too far away from the question?
No, that was fine. It's almost like what I got from what you said was the new tools recycle what you take down, like not recycle,
Yeah.
reboot, reinvent it, you know, um, refresh it, whatever, it's like we don't have to discard. It's a phenomenon here in Southern Cal, which I always tackle. Like if you're rich enough to buy a California craftsman's house, what do? Buy an old one and then spend 50 years trying to fix it up because it's, already 50 years old, or you just tear it down and build the brand new one, and then you don't have to fix it up for 50 years. So the historical preservationist wants to think, well, we don't have to tear things down. We can, restore and keep them strong by maintaining them. So, it's sort of a stupid yuppie example, but it is something that people can consider, because the attitude in San Francisco was, and I know you spent time there, was that, you don't tear the old buildings down, you try to restore them. And, a lot of, like, LA is more like, you just tear down and build new, and it doesn't necessarily have to look new. It can even be a reproduction of the old.
I think the thing is, I had something I was in. Oh, I know what it was. When you think about the avant-garde, it is always about taking something that's come before and creating something entirely new. So that's not a new idea to think of it that way. I think that the tricky part is we become attached, we become sentimental about certain things. So you think of it as a metaphor. It's not so much that it's not really about, there are definitely things we can lighten our load and get rid of. The challenge is we tend to attach ourselves to something familiar, and it's hard to do that. But it's only if you can kind of cut through that brush and get to the real stuff, get to the orangeness of the orange, get to the middle of the fruit, instead of always thinking about how something appears on the outside.
Yeah, we call that the nut meat, or the chewy caramel center. Okay, so Marshall McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that an artist are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting the hidden psychic effects of what we invent so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about these inventions. So he said you can actually turn to the artists, filmmakers, painters, authors, to uncover these hidden psychic effects, but we still ignore them. So why do you think humans still ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though artists reveal these effects to us?
I think people perhaps get too, you know, uh, too caught up in their own point of view, or they have a certain monovision about something, and maybe that's because we serve we crave certainty. We ultimately would like to have this certainty. Is kind of where this, we were talking about just a few moments ago. And artists are, I think, artists reside in an uncertain place, right? It's a fluid place, and so that's unsettling to people. to hear some prophecy that is not providing them with the answers they were looking for, but rather how to become comfortable in being uncomfortable. So maybe that's as close as I can come to an answer to that as to why. Why is it? It's because artists embrace that space.
I love the word you use, fluid, and I'm glad you brought up point of view, because McLuhan really talked a lot about understanding is not having a point of view, and is this thing of suspended judgment. And I'm always curious, do you think, again, it's sort of a stupid question, but do you think point of view is more invented or more innate in humans?
I think it's a word that's been oversimplified maybe and overused to, again, kind of get close to this idea of exactness. But to me, a point of view should really be informed by many perspectives, right? So it's actually not about single authorship at all. It's not about that. To have a point of view would really be to bring in people at every point along the circle to inform that. So is it innate? I would say not. I would say it's something that really has to be developed. And in order to have a point of view, you need to be constantly challenged. And that's not meaning to have conversations with people who think always the same way you do. It actually means being willing to have conversations with people who potentially challenge your position. And to me, in those conversations or being exposed to creative work or whatever that is, it pushes you closer. If there's anything closer to some truth or some understanding, it's really that constant challenge that takes you closer to that, closer to forming your own point of view.
Really well put. I don't know if you've read McLuhan much, but you really nailed two of his major things that I've learned from studying him. Is he loved Pascal, the philosopher mathematician. He says, in order to understand anything, you got to understand this end of the spectrum and that end and everything in between. And you sort of summarize Pascal's point, which I totally keep reiterating to people in your words, in your own way. And then when you said, that point of view probably was invented, McLuhan almost like as a comedian or a poet said, we invented point of view when we invented the vanishing point. Like,
oh, sure.
And that was like, did humans sit around and go, well, these radish leaves are a little too bitter. I'm not going to eat those, but I'll eat the red part of the radish. Like, where did this come along? Where, we developed like aesthetics or taste. One time I brought that up and someone goes, I do eat the greens of radishes. So anyways, thanks for that. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
What do you think? What do you suppose I'm going to answer?
Now that answer I've never had in 35 years interviewing. What do you think I'm going to say? I think you're a wide thinker. I can't even get,
Wow. Gosh, I feel like I want to challenge old ideas all the time. I love that. On the other hand, I bought a house that looks exactly like the house I grew up in, with two trees in the front and the kid in the bicycle. And I think that all this time I thought for sure I would want to go as far away from that tree-lined street as I could go. And then in the end, almost unconsciously, I find myself sitting, staring at a window that is very familiar. So, so I can't tell you entirely that I don't appreciate and even long at times for things that are familiar. And in terms of new ideas, the only thing I'm scared of about new ideas is um, old ideas that pretend to be new. So
Yeah.
it worries me that things become so narrow, regardless of what side of the line you're on. And that's a really old, kind of rigid way of thinking. So if something's posturing as new, and it's really limiting, that concerns me no end, you know.
Yeah. I got it from John Cage. He says, I can't understand why people are afraid of new ideas. I'm afraid of the old ones. But it really, this other guy, Charles Kettering, said, people are very open-minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old things. So
Yeah.
you tackled that well. Amanda, can you conjure up your earliest memory or one of them?
This is so strange. So my earliest memory, I was I was a year old. I had pneumonia as a baby, no more than somewhere around a year, and I have this sensory memory of being in a hospital bed and peering out of the window from this bed and seeing a friend of my mother's, that my mother was not there that day. And instead, a friend of my mother's came, and I recognized her, and I hit on the glass. And I know that I wasn't speaking yet at that point in my life, because I remember, like, I had to figure a way to get her attention, and I couldn't articulate it. So, I remember knocking on the glass. So the memories that I have are very, sensory, about being alone in this bed as a small child, being without my mother, what that felt like, and then wanting to reach out to this person that, I wanted her to know I was there, not to walk past me. So that's my earliest memory.
That was very well put. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I don't think it's a blessing. I've never thought it to be a blessing. Um, I think it could be a curse, because it's also something we assume to be, a photograph, a snapshot, something that is easily recollected or continues to be recollected in the same way. We have this picture in our head of the way we thought things were, or the way we think things are going to be. And I think it's always changing. And the older we get, at least I'm speaking for me, that it begins to erase itself, just like we begin to feel erased, and the things around us that give us a sense of self. So these memories that we think we can hold on to start to disappear, or the picture changes, or how we remember them changes. And in that sense, it's maybe a burden if we hold that too close. If we aren't willing to accept that impermanence of something that we thought we could hold forever.
Yeah. Boy, you're really good with words. You really get this. I appreciate it. Who are or just name one early role model or someone who had an impact on you within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family. And just briefly, what did you mainly get from them?
Outside of my family. When you say outside of my family, are you thinking like someone in a book, or someone in a school, or?
Yeah, well, it's basically inside your immediate family is sort of like mother, father, sister,
Right.
brother, aunts, uncles, grandparents. Outside your immediate family could be anything. Yeah, it's like all these questions. You put them into the context you want. If it's like Lewis Carroll, that's fine. Or if it's Marina Abramovich, I mean, and I'm sort of leaning toward early, but it's usually
All right.
people say a teacher. But it's whoever you want, whoever says. I'll
Okay.
tell you unique. Go ahead.
Okay. You can go first if you want. Do you want to tell
No,
me
no, no.
first?
I always interject these things how other people answer some, and it's let's go with what you're saying. Go ahead.
So my mother had a cousin, and my mother, when she married my father, so she's a Romanian Catholic girl from the wrong side of the tracks, marries a Jewish Ukrainian, who right after World War II. So they both had their issues. Anyway, and a lot of guilt. But anyway, my mother had this cousin named Vicky, who really was from, my mother grew up in a poor family, and her father worked in the factories, and Vicky was her first cousin. So their fathers were brothers. And it was actually Vicky that I was the closest to in many ways. So despite the fact my mother had kind of improved her position and married my dad and had a very different life than her cousin, Vicky was really this person. It was so authentic to me and so warm, that she had a huge influence on me. And she used to make these, she would make anything she could out of yarn, and she would make those dolls with crocheted skirts, or the like, really things that we would likely judge as not being fine art or high art or whatever. In as an artist, though, she made those all her life. She was constantly wanting to make something. So I remember feeling like, to me, Vicky was one of the greatest people I ever met, in the hug she gave and the way that she always was curious and always wanting to create something, whatever someone else thought about it or not, right? So that would be my family member. And an outsider, my dad had some friend that would show up every, once a year, every couple years, and he played the guitar, and he had long hair, ponytail, and when he would show up, sometimes he would come with a woman, sometimes not, and they would send us to bed, and they would sit in the living room, and he would play the guitar, and they would sing these songs that seemed very grown up to me. They would send us off, and whatever the experience was that they were having in this space, when Bruno came to town, my mom and dad were very different people. And they sent us out of the room, and there was like a bit of a raucous, and they would have a drink. And I remember just thinking that was like the most unbelievable thing. And this guy was like a traveling, magician kind of, right? Who came into this Ohio living room, and he totally changed who I thought my parents were.
That's like a hootenanny. That's a beautiful story. I love that. Those are my favorite people. So did they raise you a particular religion?
I was raised Jewish, but my mother always, my mother in these ways no, you don't have to go to Sunday school. Oh, this. So yeah, my mom converted. I was raised Jewish, but I don't think it was ever something entirely worked out or resolved.
Do you pray?
I do pray. Yeah, not in a organized way, and I haven't been in a temple probably since I was divorced 10 years ago. So I don't go to an organized place to worship, but I have a
If
lot of
God,
conversations with myself, imagining someone else is listening. So
if God exists, what do you want God to tell you after you die?
I'd like him to tell me I have another chance to do it again.
No, that was beautiful. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I don't believe that evil exists. I think that I'd like to think that people start out all with the best of intentions or goodness, And I think life is really hard, and I think it takes a tremendous toll on people, and I think that's true for generations of people. It's just so hard, that it wears people down, and I think evil is just the result of a way that people have been lost or damaged, or or cast aside, even, and it manifests itself in that way.
Yeah, I generally find people all agree, most people agree that we're all capable of evil. And so, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set this one up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola, good Detroit boy, stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. Fellini says, I need an enemy. In Chinese proverb goes, he who cannot agree with their enemy is controlled by them. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Usually, if someone, is if I identify somebody as my enemy, um, it has a great deal more, right, to do with something I'm struggling with myself. So that would be the first thing. And I don't often think of people as oppositionally in that way, really. Um, so tell me. So let's go over the first one again. What's the first point again? The one specifically you
Well,
want me to address?
right. Well, what you really, that you nailed it with that. We can move on, but it's basically Alan Watts. I mean, that's a great attitude. I agree with that. Like if you go, you're stingy, if you point at someone and say you're this, it's usually something in yourself that you're seeing and you want to put it on someone else so you can maybe see it clearer, but there's some conflict involved. But it's just Alan Watts saying, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Oh yeah.
So
Maybe I would say if you. Hmm, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean,
yeah,
I don't think so.
because a lot of times people go, if you don't acknowledge them, you empower them. So I mean, in the whole thing about silence. So it was fine. Let's move on. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?
Mhm.
Faulkner said years later, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Wow, this is a big question. One thing I'm going to bring, I want to go back to, you asked me whether what travels faster, and I said to you, light. And I
Yeah,
think light is like, you know, light is a painting, light is a church, light is a film, light, the power of that, it's ecstatic. And so, why do we go into a movie theater? That's just because, to me, that's like a church, where you're
yeah,
all coming together and you're all experiencing this larger than life experience. And the light has a great deal to do with that. So that would be my thinking on film or movies.
yeah,
And in terms of fictions, to me, the same notion you had of like of gaining understanding the full spectrum. Fiction is a way of doing that, right? You know, without killing each other, or without having the affair, or without stealing the money, without kicking the dog, you know, then by exploring all of those feelings and responses that we have or that someone else has, we're able then to have a full gamut from which to you know, to develop these perspectives or points of view. So I think we get a great deal out of fictions and out of movies. And I was thinking during the film festival in Ann Arbor recently that to me, film is, if there were a time capsule that aliens discovered 2,000 years from now, if we could be represented in these small bits of film, you know, to me, that would be the most accurate portrayal of human beings and our experience, because film is just so fleeting and so impermanent, and you know, the fluidity of that. So of all media, for me, film captures that essence of figuring it out, and the speed and the haste and the gesture of that, right? That's how yeah.
It's really well put. And I agree with you. It's like a church, a painting. There's so much. But because you brought up the word light, excuse me, I don't usually ask this question, but I'd love to hear your take on it. And this is, McLuhan sort of touched on this, that TV is light through, like a stained glass window. It's light through, right-brained, more female. Film is light on, like a mural, left-brained, more male. And now you don't have to delve into all the male-female breaking down, but do you see a difference in your study of light, as there's a difference between light through and light on? Because in essence, I'm watching the Ann Arbor Film Festival for the last 2 years, and it's combining light on and light through, because it's sort of like I'm watching this little TV set, which is a computer laptop, but a lot of these films were made with the light on medium, which is, it's mural, light on. And do you see any difference between light on and light through experience, or any feelings on that?
Well, like, you know, like you, I've adapted remarkably the past year to experiencing things through a screen. And if you'd asked me a year ago, did I find that satisfying? Did I find that particularly moving? I would have said no. You know, I wouldn't have felt I could have even, you know, I wouldn't have thought I would ever be appreciating work in the way that I was able to over the past year. But part of me wonders if it's really this longing I keep going back to, you know, like we have a framework for that. We understand it. It's almost like someone we loved, you know, and then we're adapting by filling in the blanks, like whatever isn't there for us in that experience, we're at least able to, you know, we're able to get close because we know something about this, right? We can fill in those blanks. But in normal circumstances, if you ask me, are they different? I think they're absolutely different. And partly the TV light and through the screen or the computer, that feels so contained to me. Whereas this idea of light from film or an installation in a real physical space, for me, that's about some aura. You know, that's a whole different kind of light. So that's, I do see a difference, but I wouldn't lie to you to say that if this is our new normal, if this is what we're doing now, I might forget. You know, I might forget. And it would become the new way that I was able to experience.
Yeah. Amanda, that was well put. It evoked in me this quote. Igor Stravinsky says, most people don't know what they like what they know. And so I've done live events with people for 30, 40 years. And that's what I specialize in, is live event. Oh, you can see a free movie, but it's the discussion afterwards that's important for me. It's the live interaction with human beings. For 1 year, I've done Zooms 4 or 5 times a week, and they're better than all my live events because everybody's attentive and they're more present. They're all in their boxes, like me and you would. Normally, I've done these in Ann Arbor for 20 years in back of the Michigan Theater in one of those little dressing rooms. And I interview all these filmmakers and people with the festival. And it's been nice to be in there, but this is better than if we were there in a way, in a way,
Yeah.
because we're both used to the Zoom experience now, and we're both attentive to each other's eye contact more than our eyes wandering in the room. So it is sort of a delight to hear what you just said. So tell me the follow through where you were first attracted to pursuing art. I know you do a lot. You're a curator. You're an artist. I loved your performance art piece, Running. Brilliant. And in your backpack thing, the whole thing about the backpack thing not being in the New York Times, that was so cool to me. Like, it didn't matter. Of course, you wanted your dad to see it in the New York Times, and eventually it did. But it was like, what? Well, what do you do art for? So I've seen some of your art. What was that through line? You're growing up, and your parents are taking you to art galleries, or what? And where did you go? Oh, I want to do that.
Well, I grew up in Canton, Ohio, so it's not like I grew up in New York or any place, right? But I
Yeah.
told you there were these two people that came together, and uh, they embraced their otherness. Like, they loved that they were other, and they painted their house turquoise in this little town. And I think we were born into this place where they certainly encouraged us to. To express ourselves, not to follow the pack. They wanted us to embrace that same philosophy. So as a little kid, my mom did have paper and paints out on the table, and my friends would come over and they remember. I didn't realize this at the time, but no one else was doing that on play dates. No one was sitting there painting paintings or working with clay, or you name it. My mom was always providing us with these ways to engage with the world, but make something to express how we felt about things, giving us an outlet. And for sure, they played Stravinsky, and for sure, we looked through books about painters, and I knew abstract expressionists even as a young kid. The irony is, I found that all to be so rarefied as a child that all I wanted to do was leave. I didn't want that. I wanted to be sitting playing rinky dink and having having some other experience. So I think it's funny that I really thought that was just so rarefied. Like, what the fuck? Can't I just go out in the world? And the minute I could, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to stay up all night and eat pizza and lose my virginity. And, just like I didn't want to be part of it once I reached like 18, 19. So I think that then I went through this rebellion of that. Nonetheless, it was absolutely my foundation. And I went to art school, and I played the harp, by the way, when I was in high school. So I had a harp. Really, it was like a wish list of how to raise this cultured daughter. But I think I was also suspicious. Like, what does that mean to raise a daughter who plays the harp? It just felt all just a little too precious. And so I guess I had to go through this period of figuring that out, and became very interested in the music scene. In San Francisco, I painted. I was a really good painter. I sold work, but where I really found my niche was actually writing these pieces that were monologues. And being very transparent, very real, like things you wouldn't tell, things I wouldn't have told my mother's friends, right, at a party, or not that girl playing the harp. If the girl who played the harp told you really who she was, what would the story be? So I think that that's how those two pieces came together, that I was this persona and I wanted to share these stories. And then later I started curating, so I performed, I taught, I performed all in New York and Chicago. I taught performance, and the curation, honestly, it felt like any other part of my artistic practice. I've never felt it to be a consolation prize, because it's very collaborative. And I think being an artist can be really lonely, and I'm very social. So every time I work with an artist, it's like I get to just have an independent study and learn something from them, and hopefully I'm able to offer them something. So I didn't tell you, I left out a whole lot of parts.
Well, that was good. Yeah, I was just going to compliment you on how brief you were, because I asked in the question, on the suggestions before we start, keep your answers to 2 to 4 minutes, and you did that really well, Amanda. That was super.
See,
You gave a good, solid mini profile. I was just curious, because I'm such a huge fan of performance art. Who did you see performance art wise growing up that you go, oh, I can do that? I'm just curious, specifically, like your running monologue, or somebody who you saw do that. Anybody stand out where that had not an influence, but just go, oh, they do this sort of thing.
Not so much performance art. I don't think I had any specific exposure to that as a young child. My mother was in theater. So, I think I saw performance art as being the flip side of my mother, in a way, right? This woman, right?
Yeah.
And so, but later in San Francisco, I was really influenced by Spalding Gray. And
I was
honestly, Whoopi Goldberg had just started out and did a one-woman show. Eric Bogosian.
No, I was going to guess all through. I was going to guess Spalding was going to be it in Eric. And I says that Amanda has to have, Eric's wife, Jo Meany's book on performance art. That is that's the Bible. And Ruth Draper,
Yeah.
she's, and most of us didn't know Ruth Draper, but then eventually we learn how these people were the forerunners of sort of what performance art is. But that gave me a good idea. So I appreciate that. So tell me, in your creative pursuits for the years you've done it, one major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
I think one element that stayed the same is I've really never tried to. I don't really think I've ever done anything to try, for effect. I've never done anything that came from a place of worrying about how it came off. It was really more about trying to get as close to the matter, right? As close to something authentic. That's what interested me. That in my life and growing up, and with all the wonderful things I talked about, what was difficult for me was this fear of exposure, right? Like, what if people had a truer sense of struggle or doubt or fear or anger, what all those things are, that the whole thing could come undone. So I think that I continued to feel that I was also, to the outside of the living room. I've always felt, for whatever reason, to the outside of the living room, and that I've continued to maintain that position of always feeling to the outside rather than feeling accepted on the sofa. That has felt important to me, so that I don't lose my relationship really with what matters to do work about. And that was true of my paintings. It was true of the performance. It's true of the curation. That I'd like to provoke, not to shock, not to do anything for shock, but to hopefully further some conversation in a way that is provocative. So that's been what stayed the same. And then you said what's changed.
Yeah, just one major element that you found changed.
I guess I'm talking too much about myself, but
no, that's what this is about. Don't worry.
I'm not the perfectionist. Like, this is not to say that I'm not absolutely obsessive about detail and but I mean to say that I'm not a perfectionist in that I take myself apart, or I try to take someone else apart in the process of making creative work. I think in my 20s, I just thought that was like a letter that should be emblazoned on my chest, that I would tell a story and people would be devastated, or I would be. And now I think, what the hell? Like, what an arrogant, ridiculous, narcissistic thing to do, to think that that's how irresponsible that is, to invite people in and then, devastate them to the point that they leave not put together, and I don't see any value in doing that to myself either.
That was well put. And then Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much did you think or do think of your audience while you're creating your art, in the creative process, not after, but when you're creating something? How much are you thinking of your audience?
Initially, I'm not thinking of the audience initially. So the place I start is not concerned with that. But then as I get closer to wanting to take it out in the world, I think a lot about it. I think a lot about it because I want to communicate something. Yeah. And I told you, I feel a great responsibility as an artist now. I grew up as an artist in feeling that I'm not interested in something that's just about something self-reflective. I'm much more interested in work that feels like it has an awareness of everybody else, and how do I want the work to be presented, and how is it going to affect other people, and what is my responsibility? Yeah.
Peter Greenaway says cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way, or are they doing something completely different? I know it's both, but just you get the question. Like Tony Conrad's, Tony Conrad's flicker is just black and white, flickering on and off. We could have a story when we're watching it go through our head, but he probably didn't so much intend, I'm going to tell this story with those two images, black or white. So it's funny because, I rattle off all these cute quotes, and the whole purpose is to reinvent them. I try to make this clear to people. I'm not just trying to rattle off quotes to impress you. I'm trying to rattle them off so that we'll reinvent them. So it was last night, one of my friends who I really look up to, I said, cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. He goes, literature is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Now, and I know how important the word story is in your talks, in what you've said in the past. And I'm not trying to say storytelling's bad. I think, stories are our food. We need them. It's important. But I do like what Greenaway's sort of saying, that cinema is too rich a medium to be left, because basically 130 years of cinema is filming plays. So, it's storytelling in that narrative sense. you, sorry to ramble on, but you get the question, but I think it's a key one with your love and articulation on the importance of story. You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, go ahead.
Well, first of all, you're not sorry that I'm not matching you for quotes, are you? You're not expecting me to quote. I actually have.
No,
Okay, good.
no,
Because
no, I'm
okay.
just happy you're here talking. Usually, if it gets to be this uh quoting duo, I'm like, okay, but it's just my style, and your style is you put in your own words. That I'm more than joyous and happy that you're doing it that way.
If you want me, I will, but I'd rather just think about okay. Like dueling.
Right, right, dueling quotes. No, I'm glad you're putting your own words.
Okay.
That's much more impressive to me. That's what
Okay.
that's really what this series is about, is to get the person to jump out of their stock lines. Like my questions are all scripted for 30 years, stock lines. And then the person who I'm interviewing, I want them to get a little deeper and explain what's behind them. So however you go, it's great what you're doing. So yeah, carry on.
Okay. You're so right. Like I love story, right? And even when I was a painter, they were somewhat abstract, but it always felt important that that there be a story to it. And when I first got involved with the film festival, I won't lie to you. I felt like craved. Where's the story? Or which groups felt like. I was interested and intrigued, and I love that it was experimental, but it was kind of challenging to watch them.
Yeah.
and it was because I missed the story, right?
Yeah.
But then I think it harkens back to this notion of what we've become so familiar or attached to, and what would happen if that just fell away, And now I think of it quite differently. I found the film festival this year to be so amazing, like so meaningful to me. And last year too, going through the past year, the pandemic and feeling disconnected. And and so now I'm contradicting myself because the digital engagement I had with these films, it was so meaningful. And I actually wasn't looking for story, or somehow I thought the story was there whether there was one or not. But it was more like taking your clothes off. It was more like the story became the clothes. And what would happen if you took the clothes off and you just had this experience that was a series of these moments, and it didn't need the clothes, it didn't need the shoes, and it didn't need to dress up, and it didn't need to do anything. It just was this series of these amazingly beautiful capsules of moments. And so I changed how I felt about experimental film over the past 2 years during this time. I loved it before, but I do think I was always expecting something of it. And now I let that fall away, and it's one of the most gratifying media now that I can think of.
Yeah, you put it well, because basically, if you put one frame after another, that is a story. Sorry, but it's just how we define what a story is. We want character development, or we want a 3-act play or whatever. So that was really good, and I do want to talk to you specifically about the Ann Arbor Film Festival sometime. But let's move on so we can. This is Michael Apted, who passed away this year.
Yeah.
35 years ago, I asked him, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? So most people don't know. Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 20s, but it really got prominent during MTV, to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I'm cutting my films faster because of MTV. So we know this editing pace has increased. And Michael Apted said, well, because we've learned to take in information faster. So I asked this question with a bias. Can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
We can learn to take it in faster. We know that from, we know that now, right? We know that we're able to completely adjust to communicating and taking in information and engaging and connecting in new ways. And you made this great point that it's not necessarily compromised. I mean, maybe it's this question of what are we expecting. If we change that expectation, if we're open to what we expect from a certain way of engaging, or what we expect in regards to the momentum of a film, or if we let that fall away, who knows what the possibilities are. So not to go off on a tangent like that, but I think of course we can make that adjustment. I almost think we urge it on. I would say that started to happen, not even just because we could take in things more, but because it sort of became reflective of the way we live and we move, and momentum, that frenetic kind of nature of being. So I would take it even deeper, beyond just ways of engaging or how fast we think, or, it's to me bigger than that.
Well put. My friend even reworded the aphorism by McLuhan to the medium is the momentum. I love that word. Amanda, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
I think conviction.
Way to go. All right. Now, in what you've accomplished in your life, which is a lot, how do you rate these three elements: luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest role, second and third?
Luck, skill, and ambition. Ambition really was first. I hate to say, I was driven.
Yeah.
Then luck. And then skill. I think skill came third.
Yeah.
Possible? Like, with all the skill I had I not had a certain amount of serendipity in my life, or been open to it, I don't think things would have happened. So I feel like luck, maybe more something serendipitous than luck, but
Yeah.
but drive was really, I was determined. I've been a very determined person, and I think that made a difference. I would say.
Yeah. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
It's a series of pictures first.
Very good.
Series of images and pictures, and then I decipher them, and then I just tinker with them. It's a process of tinkering, but I think I always start with something that's an image or a series of images.
Thanks. You really get these questions. I appreciate it. The founder of the festival, George Manupelli, his mantra was ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says he's just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through him. Is art making more self-expression, or more you're a vehicle for whatever dominant culture or technology is present? I know it's both and it depends, but just in general, you sort of get the.
Say it again. Can you say it again one more time?
Is art making, filmmaking, writing more self-expression, or more you're a vehicle for whatever dominant technology or culture is present?
I think it's about urgency. And I want to make the distinction. I don't mean art that's just about commodity, making things, stuff. I'm not like talking about just stuff making, but I think the process of making, being serious about making art comes from a sense of urgency. And I think the creation of technologies and new ways to communicate and express these ideas also comes from that place of urgency. So I think of it more as an urgency, a necessity that is the top of the triangle, and then artistic expression and the creation of new media come from that sense of immediacy and urgency.
Yeah, no, that's Martha Graham. Great artists aren't ahead of their times. They are their times. You know, that
Yeah.
urgency, they are. Um, is perception reality?
I think that it is. Yes. I think that it is how we see it, how we see the world, the way we see things. And I think there are opportunities all the time to have something completely change the way we see things, you know. So uh, both those things are true. You know, I think perceptions are our reality for the moment. And then if we're lucky, if so luck is important, if we're lucky and curious, something can absolutely change the way we see things. And that's kind of the, you know, that's just fantastic. That's fantastic.
I like that. Coleman Miller entered a film in the festival one year called Uso Justo. It's a fake documentary. It's a fake experimental film. It was Bruce Conner's favorite film, and it didn't get accepted. And they called up us, "We made this film just for you guys," and then it won the grand prize. So it went from the reject pile to the top of the heap. And I asked Coleman once, "Is perception reality?" He goes, "That's all you got." It really, what you said, it was sort of like that, felt that way. It was like, that's what we have. We have perception, you
Right.
know.
It's all we have,
It,
really.
that's all we have. That's all you got. Okay, Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness that you've incorporated to become a strength.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that, you know, your Achilles heel, or really the thing that hangs you up, that to somehow use that to work for you is a, you know, is a key to something. So for me, I I'm an incredibly anxious person. I've been driven by anxiety and concern and worry my whole life. You know, I told you the story of knocking on the window that someone is going to miss that I'm even there, you know. And I think that sense of like anxiety has at one time was absolutely paralyzing to me in my life, because I was so worried about doing well and doing what I should do and being that harp playing, you know, cultured um, doll, whatever that was. That
Right.
it was like it just took my breath away. You know, I couldn't move forward. And then at a certain point, I realized, oh, what if you just let it all go? You know, what if you told everybody this? And, you know, what if you came clean? And what if your anxiety actually became the momentum from which you made this work that you are desperate to make? And so when I said I was ambitious, you know, it's really like that was my drive, became that anxiety is the backbeat of every single thing I've done. And I learned to be its friend and to think about it differently, not as a limitation, but how might it give me a sense of volition? And yeah, so for me, it was anxiety.
Yeah, really well put. Yeah, at my mother's wake service, because everybody goes, "She worried too much." I said, "There's a lot of people in this room think that Dolores they worried that she worried too much." There's a fine line between worry and concern. You know, it's just the word you're using. So that was really, really a good example of that. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When you're fighting for something worth fighting for.
What's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
I think men automatically take their space. I think especially white men are accustomed to taking space, and even, men in general. And I think women always feel like they need to ask for their space, or share their space, or so even in a literal sense, on a stage, even it always feels like a man will get up in a room and take the space, and I don't think that necessarily comes naturally to many women.
It's really well done. I really want to carry on a long discussion at some time with. Have you heard of Nina Mencken's talk about the female gaze?
Yes.
Oh my God, it's really deep, and I want to talk about, but we won't go there. But I want to tell you that question is normally answered. 80% of people say, well, women, are they let their feelings out and men hold them in. And it was good to hear a new one, this thing about taking space. And that's what I like is I love the universality of the answers I get on all these questions, but it's really a treat when someone just takes a little detour and goes, it's this, way. So it's like that constant opening up. Appreciate that a lot. So you create what you resist is an old saying. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it to you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He goes, thank God I'm an atheist. So how do you react to this idea you create what you resist? I'm not saying you, Amanda, but just one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that idea?
Just that those are still those stumbling blocks, right? That there are these stumbling blocks, and they show themselves over and over in one's life and one's practice, and it just seems that uh, um, you just continue to try to figure out ways to solve those puzzles, right? So they, in a sense, become what defines the practice. If
Yeah.
it's always those same stumbling blocks, and those become the pursuit, really, is to decode that, to solve the conundrum, then sort of like a daddy complex. You can go the opposite way, but ultimately that's what then defines the work.
Yeah. I love your word decode. That is so important. That was really well put. And so how do you find peace of mind?
I run. I get a great deal out of running. I allow that inner dialogue in my head to just go free when I run. And the rest of the time, I think I'm always trying to quiet it, or put it in the back bedroom or whatever. And so I think that's kind of a place for me that's very meditative. And I've told you lately, I get quite a bit of peace just out of feeling that I have a place. I'm a person that's been, moved a dozen times and moved across the country, and have always been that person that didn't feel attached to some place, right? And now that I am, I realize that it has calmed me a bit not to always be on the run. So I'm kind of ridiculously simple in the way that I talk to you about how I've lived and what I've made. I've been always on the run, and I've always craved a place. And those two things have guided me. And
Yeah.
it made me also deeply sensitive to what other people must be feeling that's similar to that. Uh, Um,
Yeah, to some people, the pandemic year has been, wow, what a relief. I could just sit around and focus on things, and then, oh no, is everything going to get turned back on? Please, no, not quite yet. Can't we just wallow in this a little more? But I love your use of the word momentum, and especially like running. As a bike rider, I need 3 bike rides a day. And that's because that's where my mantra, it's like loosens me to just, it's the momentum. You're like free in that sort of space of moving for your brain to just, I don't know, be peaceful. And, I think one thing we have in similar is that we know how to embrace contradiction, that you don't have to fight contradiction. That's the main thing I learned from Frank Zappa, in fact, because his great Zen line was, nothing is what I want. So can you forget to die?
You mean just forget that it's going to happen?
Well, you're answering a question with a question. So Amanda, you win. That's what this series is all about, inventing new questions.
Oh God, I wish I could,
Very, very good.
Wish I could. But one thing I had felt in the past year, my mother passed away a couple years ago, and what I never could have imagined is that there would be this time on the back end to solve the issues I had with her when she was alive. That I kept thinking, that she would be gone, and we had missed this opportunity to fix things. And then I had no idea that I would feel her presence much more strongly with me in this reparative way after she was gone. So, that's been a great surprise. So that's my answer to the death question. I don't think you can pretend it doesn't happen, but I think we might be surprised at what happens next.
Well put. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
That is so easy. I would say, don't date a musician.
Very good.
Yeah, that's an easy one, right? Stay away from from punk rock and.
I love it.
Very.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
To be continued?
They want very good. They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell would it be?
Lavender.
Oh man, I get that answer a lot. I love that. Okay. Huh?
It's because your mother, it's about your mother. Lavender. My mother's house was always, smelled of lavender.
Oh yeah.
Go on.
Well, the Michigan lavender is big, and it's a great smell. Okay, it's flowers. Okay, if a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
I don't know. I don't think I have any. I can't come up with anything for this. Is the first time you stumped me.
That's all right. I'm not about stumping. I said at the beginning in the discussion, saying I don't know or pass is totally okay. Well, we got about 10 more minutes, so this has been really fun. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good I never had and I never want. I think a really big house.
Very good.
I don't want more space than I can feel secure in. Nothing I'd really want.
Very good. I'm going to ask a couple more, then Clinton will come on and ask one, and then I'll end with 2 more. Amanda, this has been truly enlightening. Thank you so much. Joseph Boys, who you probably know, who he is. I quote him here where he says, "Make the secrets productive." Lou Welsh, a beat poet, said, "Guard the secrets, but constantly reveal them." But it was Thornton Wilder who said in 28, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time." So again, a cute quote, it means a lot, but you've laid your cards out on the table for 80 minutes here. So I'm not implying you haven't done this. What's it really all about for you?
I think that there is a way that it is this way that there's certain things revealed and other things kind of held back. So for me, I think it's more of this ongoing exploration, and
Yeah.
I'm not looking to have answers exactly, and I'm definitely not interested in just the reveal, but I think I'm interested in what that reveal, what comes next, what the next step is, what the next thing we don't know is. Quite honestly, that each time I reveal something or come to understand something, I'm much more interested in where that leads me in regards to what I don't yet understand or know. So
Yeah.
it's just how one thing leads to another is really the interest for me.
Yeah. That's good, beautiful. It's sort of like pattern recognition leads to comprehensive awareness. And it's like, it's not important what the answer is, it's more important what the new question is or the new metaphor. So we'll bring on Clinton. He is such a trooper to know, one of those people who knows what button to push, and he listens. Clinton, what do you have to ask Amanda?
Yeah, it's been a wonderful interview so far. One thing you said that really popped out was when you got Jerry asked this question about memory. You were like, "Well, it's certainly not a blessing," and then, right? I thought that was kind of funny, because for me that resonates with you know linear storytelling in, say, a medium like film, right? And so I was wondering if there's some sort of comparison I'm thinking to memories as these continuous stories we tell ourselves about our past, and then if a traditional film with its story compares to, say, a state of mind or state of being where you're not quite telling a story, but you're experiencing it more erratically or discontinuously, like the experimental films you were talking about. So, can you classify people sort of along those lines? Does that work?
I think so. I feel kind of stoned all of a sudden. No, I'm kidding. um, all right, here's what I think. So I don't think memories are a blessing because they can become really, fall in on themselves. So I do think film, even regular film, opens up those spaces for the quite the opposite. And you're absolutely right that's how I would see film, as this wonderful way to still delve into memory, but just the very nature of the material, even of film, of the light of film, like all the things we were talking about, that they allow for a much more open-ended investigation of
Mhm.
memory and the impact of memory and the life of memories and stories. So that's how I see the relationship of those two things, and maybe that's why it is so satisfying for
Mhm.
me. That there's quite literally opacity and transparency and experimentation and on and on and on in narratives presented through a film medium.
So are there movies that you watch again and again, and maybe you're they change, but then you know that it's in fact you who've changed since the last time you watched it, that sort of thing?
Yeah, less now. Like some movies for me, I find problematic, that I used to just automatically say, I love this movie, I think I turn to movies now to, um, that feel really relevant to some moment I'm in. I expect less of, I don't hold on to them in the way you're talking about, but I did for a long time,
Mm.
but maybe it's like for instance, I'm having, I'm screening a movie tomorrow, and the movie I chose for my birthday during the pandemic is Rosemary's Baby.
Whoa.
Like that's a good example.
Oh,
That
I watched
I
that 3 weeks ago. That's uncanny.
I love those movies that, yeah, that fit, that tell me about something going on, right? How I'm feeling and where we are in the mix
Mhm.
of it.
Very good questions. I've never, and Roman is a master, and it's hard to, you know, talk all about him in every aspect. But Clinton, what a brilliant question. And to get the compliment that you feel stoned by a question you answered goes right along with, we're students of Finnegan's Wake, and they asked Marshall McLuhan, I hear you're a friend of Tim Leary's and you take LSD. He goes, no, I don't take LSD, but my friends who read Finnegan's Wake out loud say it's just like tripping. So we ask questions that make you feel high without slipping any drug through the platform on your Zoom. Very good, Clint. So just two more questions, Amanda. This has been really fun. What's the healthiest cultural shift you see developing today?
I think that art and cultural experiences are more accessible. Less just for the few. That there's this shift away from the symphony just being for the penguins who are in the audience who are able to afford it, and more elitist. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that art doesn't have to be elitist. Um, um, and I think that's really important. And then this is like, I know you only asked me for one, but the other one is I think people are passing the mic. They're not thinking they've got to hold the mic, and it's just I'm gonna get up there, and this is about me and this art. This story. I think it's like, let somebody else tell the story. You don't have to be the mouthpiece. You don't have to be that there's nothing to be lost in just letting go of that as some mandate, whether it's institution, whether it's a single author, whether it's it doesn't have to be about one. It could be about many, and that requires us to be willing to pass the mic. And that's from somebody who tells monologues. So I'm saying that because I love a solo act. I love a good story, but pass
But
it.
Amanda, your answer really summarizes your attitude where curating is this big hip new word now. I'm curating. And you sort of said, sort of naturally, I feel that you naturally went from being an artist to a curator and knew all along that they weren't separate. That you're curating is part of you. It's much like Zappa. Zappa said, "Oh, all my music, all my interviews are all the big note. They're all intertwined. It's the big note." So it's like, oh, now I'm a curator, now I'm an artist. No, you naturally gravitate towards that, and I respect you in that. So the final question is, what gives you the most optimism?
Well, I could give you a really simplistic answer and say I find a great optimism in my children, which I do, in a very accessible answer, that I do see in them. I see in them possibilities, with all these stumbling blocks that I've had. How might they find a new way, right? How might they find new solutions that I couldn't, that we as a generation haven't been able quite to tackle. And I'd like to think there was some hope in the way that people began to genuinely care about other people this year. That there was proof of something positive in the way that we needed each other, and we clearly depend on one another to care, to take care of each other. And so to have that play out and see the possibility that we could move forward with that mindset of not just being one, but having this compassion and empathy rather than some exhaustion of empathy. That's hopeful to me. And also scary,
Yeah.
if we're not able to do that. But certainly we saw the opportunity for that.
Yeah. Well, again, Amanda, it's been an honor and a pleasure. You truly enlightened both of us and all the people who watch this. And, it sort of goes full circle to how you opened, to love and be loved. I'm going to ride my bike now by a house on the boardwalk in Venice where Eden Abes used to hang out. And he wrote those 5 great words: to love and to be loved. So thank you so much.
Yeah.